Hey everybody, I'm Lon Stroschein, former public company executive turned lifestyle engineer. In 2022, I walked away from my job as a public company executive. I left without a safety net, without another job, without a backlog of clients, or without a resume. But I left anyway. I left because I knew the best days of my life were right in front of me, and they weren't going to be lived where I was standing. Since then, I've launched a best-selling book, coached thousands of elite performers around the world, hosted a top-rated podcast, moved my family across the country, and created a movement that has inspired the change in 1,000 lives. Look, if you're here, it's not an accident or an algorithm. It's you. If you've reached the top of your game and you feel stuck, if you'd trade what you have but don't know what you'd trade it for, then buckle up. This podcast is for you. I'm glad you're here. Let's get started. I'm going to see all of you along the Normal 40 Highway. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Normal 40, the podcast. My name is Lon Stroschein. I am the founder of the Normal 40. I am super excited that you are here, and we've got another bang-up show for you on Normal 40, the podcast. Today, I get to sit down with my friend, John Shufeldt. John is a wildly accomplished human being. In fact, when I was doing my research for my conversation with John, I do as I often do, as I sit down, I just kind of start pulling up some information from their websites, from LinkedIn and public records. And when I sat down and started pulling information on John, it just did not stop. It just didn't stop. This is a guy whose dad was a World War II veteran. He decided at age 5 that he was going to, that it would probably be a good idea to be a doctor. But then he got a whole bunch of bad grades and he wasn't sure if that was going to be the case. Then he decided maybe he should get a MBA. And then he decided after that, he should go get his law degree. And then all along the way, he decided, well, maybe I'm going to be an entrepreneur someday and I should go to Harvard and get some accreditation. And then I'm going to become a pilot, which he's been for the last 35 years. And the list goes on. He's a black belt in Six Sigma. And in top of that, he's a founder and investor of a venture capital firm that does amazing things. And he gives a whole bunch of his time to traveling to reservations coast to coast to help people who should have better access to health. Okay, John Shufeldt. He is a dude you're going to want to get to know, and you're going to get to hear all about him, hear about his story. And probably the thing that was most impactful to me was the story he's going to tell about the if only look. And you're going to have to get deep into the conversation before that comes up. But the moment he talks about it, you're going to relate. And the last thing I'll say is he's doing something right towards the end of the conversation. I ask him, so what's next for you? You've done all these things. What's next for you? And his answer kind of blows my mind. And in fact, I can't wait to see where it goes because it's got me thinking now too. And it's got other people in this audience of the Normal 40 who probably are going to be impacted by it. All right, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being part of the Normal 40 journey. Thanks for being part of my journey. But most of all, thanks for taking time to let this sink in for you. If you're here, it's for you. And that's why I'm here too. My name's Lon Stroschein. I am the founder of the Normal 40. If this resonates with you, go to my website and find a time for you and I to ramble. And if this really resonates with you, join Vintage, my closed community of 6, where we go really deep on a whole bunch of topics, not the least of which getting clarity on what you want to do with the rest of your life. All right, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm going to see all of you on the podcast. Very cool. Well, look, dude, I'm super excited that you agreed to do this. I got to tell you, like I do with all my podcasts, a couple things. One, what we talk about right here might be part of the podcast, so you've been warned. And 2, when I do research for my clients, I always find really fascinating things. But the more I looked up John Shufeldt, the more I was blown away with the fascinating journey you've been on through the course of your life. And I can't wait. This is going to be like a 3-hour episode. That's just all there is to that.
Well, we'll try not to bore the hell out of you.
I'm not worried about that whatsoever. So, dude, thanks for doing this. As I've gotten to, a whole bunch of the people I talk to are in the medical community. And when I tell them that I'm having the opportunity to talk a little bit more with you. They all know you, they all respect you, and anybody who actually knows you in person all has the greatest things to say about you. And in my
Thank
data
you.
point of one, which is my first conversation with you, and just how decent you are and gracious you are with your time for a dude who probably has 50 other things you could be doing right now. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Honored.
So look, I'd love to know, this is going to be wide ranging. We're going to kind of just wander around and I want to talk about a whole bunch of things, but keep in mind the audience. It's your audience and my audience is the same type of person. They reach this stage in life where they've kind of checked the boxes. They've achieved probably even more than they thought they would have achieved at this point in their life. They're at the halftime of their life, and however they want to describe that, they've got more life in front of them. Their best years might be right in front of them. They've checked all the boxes and lived their life right, but they're not sure that they want to live the second half or at least the next chapter the way they lived their last. So they arrive here, they arrive to this podcast, they arrive to me, they arrive to your book. They're wrestling with something, this transition, there's got to be more. And so that's the journey we're going to take people on. And that's kind of where I want to take some time with you and talk about these transitions and how you've navigated them, because you've had, I don't even know if they're transitions as I read them. I can't wait to learn more about them. They're just additions as they are for you. So, but we'll ramble through that. Are you ready?
Hit me.
All right. Tell me where you were in the third grade. Take me there. Tell me what's going on.
In the third grade, I was in St. Giles, which is in Oak Park, Illinois. It was a Catholic school. I lived about 2.5 blocks away. I'd walk to school every day. And I was generally failing miserably. Mr. Lesprance was my fourth grade teacher, who was the one guy who actually kind of believed him. Or actually, he was fifth grade. Mrs. Ham was fourth grade. I don't remember third grade, but yeah, I was a C at best student, and in some of the lectures I'll put up my grade school and high school report cards just to be funny, and they're embarrassing. I mean, I think they're funny, but they're kind of embarrassing.
So what were you into? Were you into sports? Clearly you weren't into academics. We've established that.
God knows. No, I was a kind of a class clown, and I was at that point I was playing football and I was boxing and playing basketball and baseball.
All right. And so how long did you grow up your whole childhood in Oak Park?
No, I moved in seventh grade to Arlington Heights, which is a suburb. Went to another Catholic grade school for seventh and eighth grade, or middle school, and then thankfully got flunked out of the ability to go to the Catholic high school, which was all boys. Thank God. I think I got the lowest entrance exam ever, and so I got to go to the public high school.
All right, very cool. And did you play sports in high school?
Played basketball and threw discus. Discus I was okay at. Basketball with my 1-inch vertical leap. I could shoot, but I couldn't jump.
Very cool. Well, at some point in your childhood, and probably in your high school years, you made a decision to be more than a dropout student, and you made a commitment to yourself or to someone or something that said, you know, I probably better pick up the pace here a little bit, and I better at least prove to myself that I'm better than a below average student. Do you remember a time in high school when you kind of like when you realized, hey, look, maybe I've got more potential than I'm giving myself credit for?
Well, you know, when I was about 5 or 6 years old, my parents bought me a book, one of those Time Life books, and it was called The Physician. I still have it. And I remember reading it and thinking, that's me. I'm going to be a physician. And my parents kind of scoffed and said, well, you have to get better than D's and the occasional C to do that. And I always would say to them, probably 3/4 believe in it, when it counts, I will. And then and it never counted through high school, through grade school. And I got to college, and how I got into college, I do know. When I got to college, I finally was like, okay, now's the time for it to count. And a kid across the hall from me, Mike Hannigan, said, oh, I want to go to medical school. And he was at Iowa. He was a one state in Iowa wrestling. And I remember thinking, well, gosh, if he can say that, I can do it too. And so I took bio for non-majors and got an A, and then I took bio for majors and got an A. And after that, I was gone. I just got 4 points and did really well in school, and just knew I could do it. And that was the turning point.
So Mike Hannigan was somebody you met in college?
Yeah, he lived across the hall from me, and he was a wrestler in college as well. But he said, I think he was an orthopedic surgeon, as it turned out, in Iowa. And so I remember him telling me that. And I thought, well, you know, I've always wanted to go to medical school. I was a sociology major, and I thought, well, I can just take all the pre-med classes and do this. So that's what I did.
Have you talked to Mike Hannigan in the last 5 to 35 years?
I haven't talked to him in probably 40 years, actually. It's been quite a while. I should track him down and reach out to him. But he was kind of the impetus. I mean, I always knew I wanted to go to medical school, but didn't really, when I started college, I was like, well, I'll be a sociology, criminology major. And maybe some point I'll do medical school, but at that point I was like, maybe I'll go in the FBI or Secret Service or something.
It's amazing. I think we can all look back at these people who have these profound impacts on our life simply by making a suggestion or an observation. In your case, it's Mike Hannigan. And then, they had this profound impact on our life. And just because life being what it is, and we all probably have this story, it just kind of, we forget to go back and thank them. I mean,
Yeah.
look at the domino that guy tipped over for you. And you probably for him. My guess is when you find this guy now I'm curious to know what happens when you find him, and I hope he's alive and healthy and all the things. But he's probably telling people right now, hey, look, I met this John Shufeldt dude when I was a freshman in college. I don't think I'd be here without him. And wouldn't it be fantastic if that's the case?
Well, I think he would say is if that guy could do it, then I knew I was fine. And I'm serious.
All right. Well, we need that. We need those people too. No doubt about it. Okay. Well, you just set up this most amazing observation, an observation that I find with almost everybody I talk to in Normal 40. And my follow-up question was going to be, when did you know that you were going to be a physician? And you told me, I think you said you were 5 or 6 when your parents gave you a book. You kind of, the white light switch flipped on for you at age 5, where you said, I'm John Shufeldt and I'm going to be a physician someday.
Yeah. And I did not have great experiences with physicians. I had my tonsils out when I was 5, my appendix out when I was 8. And I always tell the story. I think I was 3.5 or 4, maybe 5, but my mom took me to see Dr. Giannetti. And at the end of our appointment, I'm sitting there and she says, oh, by the way, John touches himself too much down there. And I remember sitting up straight looking at like, oh my God, my mom outed me. And this old grizzly general practice doc looks at me and he goes, if you touch it again, I'll cut it off. And so my construct for healthcare was not, he was not one of the Mayo brothers. And so he wasn't really somebody I looked up to other than if I wanted to be, emasculated. But yeah, that was my first real physician encounter.
Well, that would be a memorable one, no doubt.
Yeah. I mean, it worked. I haven't touched it since.
So tell me, I think you said, so when we rambled about 3 weeks ago, and I think you said, was your dad a World War II vet?
Yeah, World War II vet, got shot twice. Once when he wasn't on D-Day, but went over there right thereafter. Got shot in the arm, recovered, then was at Remagen, which was a bridge, really the first bridge the Allies went to cross into Germany. I think it crossed the Rhine. And he got shot outside Remagen in the abdomen, in the low abdomen, and probably within millimeters or centimeters of hitting his femoral artery, from what I could tell just by what he told me. And 40 or 50 years later, he was in a reunion at the Timberwolves, and he said, I wish I could. He was sitting at the table, and most of them were dead. And the guy across from him, my dad said, I wish I could remember who the guy was that was in that foxhole with who held pressure on my low abdomen all night long. And the guy goes, Jack, that was me. And it was one of those kind of shudder moments that he probably would have bled to death, but for that guy holding pressure on his abdomen.
And he didn't know when he said that he was sitting in the room with him?
No, didn't remember who it was. And he rarely talked about World War II. I mean, less than rarely. And the few times I asked him about things like PTSD, he just shut me down immediately. He was out by the time he was 19. He was on a troop train going to California to get on a boat to invade Japan when he bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And that was it. That was the end of the war, as you know, 2 days later. And but he would have been one of the million or so plus potential casualties invading Japan.
Wow. And he never talked about that, I would imagine.
Mm-mm.
One of the things, so you correct me if I'm wrong here. When I was going back and I'm like, okay, this dude has done a lot. I mean, we've already established that at age 5, you knew you're going to be a physician, and you are. And anybody who's already familiar with you knows knows that you're a very accomplished business person, and you are, and you're an author. And we've already established on this podcast that you're a pilot, and you fly multiple fixed wing and roto wing, which, by the way, as a pilot, for anybody who's not, I can tell you those are 2 wildly different skill sets, wildly different. You can talk to tower, the language is the same because you talk to tower the same. Skill sets are wildly different. So I'm doing all this research, and one of the things that I find, and you have to tell me if this is correct, that your first college major, and maybe you even have a bachelor in arts in criminology.
Right. I was a sociology criminology major. And then I did just enough classes to take the MCATs and apply to medical school.
So what was that about? So you knew you're going to be a doctor, What is a criminology major? Where is that coming from?
Well, it actually turned out well for me. I always say sociology is the do you want fries with your Coke degree. And nothing against sociology because I actually love that discipline. But I knew
Yeah.
I shouldn't start in a pre-med discipline because I just wasn't ready for it. I wasn't mature enough academically or probably emotionally. And so I thought I wouldn't take, and I'd like to think back and say I had this all played out in my mind, but it would be a lie. I went to college thinking, let's see what happens. Let me see if I can make it. And then when I started taking pre-med classes as a sophomore, I got I think a 3 point, a 2.5, and then a 2.8 my first year. And then from then I did 4 point or whatever, 3/8. But I didn't really know I could do it until I did it. And so fortunately, if I would have started with a pre-med curriculum where I took, inorganic chemistry, bio for majors, blah, 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 I would have been done. I would have barely, if I would have passed any of them, I'd be shocked. So as it turned out, I kind of put my toe in the water in college. I was dated a girl who was a pharmacy major who I only saw if I studied with her, which helped. And so that was fortuitous, unplanned, but fortuitous.
So you took a sociology degree and you converted it into a medical school application. You got in. And when you got to med school, I'm going to jump ahead. What medicine do you spend most of your time practicing? And how early in the process did you know
So I do
what kind of
emergency
medicine?
medicine. I've done emergency medicine my whole career. But I went to medical
How
school when I was a little kid. I was going to be a CT surgeon. I read books about Denton Cooley and Michael DeBakey, and I was such a nerd in college. I went down and visited Texas Heart Institute on a spring break. Um, and I was dead set on doing CT surgery the whole way through until I did a rotation with two CT surgeons who were the classic narcissistic, crazy CT surgeons. And subsequently I learned there's a lot of really cool, badass CT surgeons, but my construct was no medical school would have let these two idiots in. So therefore they were normal when they started. And because of their training, it made them, and they were nuts, crazy. I'm like, I don't want to end up like that. And so I'd worked as an orderly in emergency departments for a few years and thought, well, gosh, maybe emergency medicine's for me. And as it turned out, it was again fortuitous and lucky because it is the perfect specialty for me personally, but also for just other things I wanted to do.
so you also we spent so much time on your educational journey because you've got so much education. As I think if you'd have
I
been
needed a lot.
18, well, but I mean, it is kind of mind blowing. I'm telling you. So I'm thinking about your high school guidance counselor. If you just said to your high school guidance counselor, yeah, yeah, I'm thinking about getting a sociology degree so that I can get into med school. And then once I'm into med school, I think I'm going to go to law school because that's probably something good. And by the way, while I'm in law school, I think I'm going to get a master's in business administration at the same time. And then when I'm done, I really want to launch a business. And then so I should probably go get some entrepreneurial studies at Harvard. And I'm going to do that. Oh, and then by the way, all these things I want to do, I want to learn how to fly an airplane, and not just an airplane. I want to fly helicopters because some of the places I'm going aren't going to be convenient for everyone. Oh, and by the way, I think it'd be really cool to volunteer my services or at least provide my services to SWAT teams in my hometown. I don't, if and that's where we are, rear view mirror looking back. Put this into perspective for me from that kid who thankfully roomed across the hall from Mike Hannigan to getting bare minimum grades as a sociology student. How what is the thing? What is that ingredient that you have that you've got, and you don't even probably like to talk about it? The ingredient that you have that moves you through these milestones.
I'd love to say it was, foreshadowing and brilliance and all those things, but at the end of the day, it wasn't. The ingredient that I have by accident is that I failed so much growing up, it became a non-event to me. And to the point where it's not even in my mental construct because I just say, oh, it's a whole thing, fall down seven, get up eight sort of times. It never bothered me to fail because I was so used to failing as a kid. And I would, get smacked around about it by my parents and yelled at and things like that. And so I just kind of just was always like, well, I survived that one. I can survive the next one. And I always laughed when I was in college, I was an RA, and these kids would come into my dorm room when I typically end of October, early November, and they'd be distraught. They gained 10 pounds. They started smoking. Their significant other, their girlfriend or boyfriend broke up with them. They were flunking out and they were just totally losing it. And I remember I was looking at them in my mind, I'd be going, seriously, that's it? I mean, come on, you don't have cancer, you're not dying, your parents aren't dying. I mean, this is small shit. And I started calling them fragile perfects. Um, and I don't know if I came up with that name after um, I'm blanking on her first name. Her last name is Duhigg, but she coined the phrase, I believe. But they were fragile perfects. They were kids whose parents never let them fail, or who were so cool and good they didn't fail. And so the little failure knocked them off the rails. And that was never me because I'd failed so much. It was just like a part of life. It was like, whatever, failed that one, do it, pick it up and do it again. And if you listen to that talk that Steve Jobs gave at Stanford for the graduation address, he talked about connecting the dots backwards. And Soren Kierkegaard has the same quote: life can be understood looking backwards, but can never be understood looking forwards. Like looking backwards, I can tie this all together. It makes totally perfect sense. But looking forwards at the time, yeah, no idea. Pure guess.
And that never goes away, does it? That the lack of visibility through the windshield, certainly not beyond the headlights. And that this is important as it relates to the people who are hearing your story right now. And they just listened to me say in reverse all of the things that you have worked through in your life. You've accomplished. They're yours. They're part of who you are. And when you set out when you were 5 and you thought, well, I'm going to be a doctor, and then you meet Mike Hannigan, and you're like, maybe I can be a doctor, and then I should be a doctor. None of that was really all that clear beyond your headlights. And there's this weird human hardwired trait in most people, but not you. I mean, and I shouldn't say that. There's a hardwired trait in most people that says, if I can't see beyond my headlights, maybe I shouldn't go very fast. Maybe I shouldn't even go that direction. And so when I ask, what is the thing that you've relied on? And really it is your ability to be unaffected by failure, at least not perpetually affected by the thought of failure. And to me, isn't that just courage? I mean, if you strip it all back, it might fail, it might work, it might not. I feel like that's the direction I should go. I can't see out over my headlights. I'm going anyway. To me, that's kind of the epitome of courage. Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening to Normal 40, the podcast. I just wanted to let you know that one of the questions I get asked all the time is, okay, what's next? I'm here, I'm listening. Your content is good. The podcasts are great, but what can I really do? And I tell people, I've created a community for you, and I don't advertise it very much, but I'm going to advertise it here. The community is called The Insider. If you go to my website, normal40.com, click on communities, The Insider is $25 a month, and you can cancel after the first month or after the first year or after the first decade. It's a month-to-month conversation. And every day I'm in there and we're communicating in a forum. And every other Thursday we have office hours where I'm in there and the whole community shows up and we support one another through their journey. I want you to check it out. If you use code Insider Access, the first month is on me. Go to normal40.com, check out The Insider, and I'm going to see all of you on the inside. All right. I'll get you back to the podcast. Thanks for being here. I'll see all of you on the next page.
And I always used to use this quote, and I stopped saying it. Like if I was in New York on 9/11, I hope I'd be the guy running up the stairs and not the guy running down the stairs. But then if you think of that logically, all the people around up the stairs died. And so is it courage or is it stupidity in not playing the long game? I like to play the long game. Like I'll invest in a drug that'll take 10 years to be developed because I think that's a long game. I went to law school thinking at some point, at some age, I probably won't be practicing emergency medicine. I don't want to work, weekends and holidays. So I'll represent physicians in front of the medical board. That was my long game thinking. And I'd like to think I play the long game, but I will tell you, back in the day, a lot of what I did was more seat of the pants. And like flying, for example, I started flying because I was afraid of it because this kid in medical school almost killed us twice when he took me up flying. I'm like, and I always loved airplanes. I'm like, well, I want to learn how to do this, but this guy literally almost killed us twice. Rob Barucki, and I'm sure he's a great pilot now, but at the time I went with him when he's just finished his private. And so that was my reason for flying. And then it became very pragmatic because I would fly to work. Like I'll fly to work in Phoenix, I'll fly to work to South Dakota. And last Friday, got up at 3:30, flew to Pine Ridge, worked all day and flew back. So it's super efficient for me. to do that. It allows me to do things that otherwise I would have to go a day early and come back a day late. And then I can just go there and pull it off the same day. So as it worked out, it was actually very thoughtful and pragmatic. At the time, it was for a totally different reason.
So let's go back to emergency medicine. At what point in your trajectory through the profession did you decide that you also wanted to get a law degree?
There was a attending that I worked with back in residency, and then he employed me at Edward Hospital. He went back and got a law degree at Edwards. And part of the things I thought about way back when, criminology era, is, get a law degree and then work for the Secret Service or FBI or one of the federal law enforcement agencies. So it was always in the back of my mind. My father was an attorney, but I did it to defend my purpose was to defend physicians in front of the medical board. I don't think the medical boards, and they say this up front, look, we're to protect we're out here to protect the public. We care, but we don't really care about the physicians. And I always thought that physicians sometimes got a bum rap in front of medical boards. And again, that's not their goal. So I get it. But I like physicians. I understand them. I understand their thought process. And so maybe I could be defending them. And I did it for a while and hated it, frankly. But it was entertaining. But I really loved the educational process of law school. I totally loved it, actually. So and I didn't do an MBA at the same time. I try to go back every 10 years. So I did an MBA, then 10 years later, I did a law degree. Then since I'm getting older, I'm sure I'll die in the next 60 years. I started accelerating. So I did a Six Sigma black belt and then some other stuff. But I try to go back and learn things that will help me later on. Like the Six Sigma black belt was for process improvement, because I did consulting in different emergency departments to help them improve their efficiency and increase their throughput and improve their quality. So that I probably ought to do that. So I'd have that badge that I could have some validity when I went into an ED and say, here's some ideas for process improvement. Here's why it works. Here's statistically why it will matter.
When you think about going to getting your MBA or getting a law degree or Six Sigma black belt, what is kind of the thought process? What are the questions you ask yourself? Because I mean, these aren't just like a weekend. I'm going to go for a week and take some courses. These are you kidding me? Law school. I mean, these are I got to be all in for a period of time on these things. What are some of the questions you ask yourself that you make sure you check in with yourself on before you say, yes, I'm going to do that?
I mean, I'm finally going back, and if I get in, I'm finally going back and doing something that has no pragmatic value of my future that I just applied for. But up until this last one, everything was pragmatic, where it was, look, I'm starting this. It was called NextCare. It was a urgent care company. My closest class to business was taking high school typing. And although I was entrepreneurial as a kid and growing up, I had zero business training. So I thought I can learn by how most people learn. It was a great way to learn, is by the school of hard knocks, or I can learn that way, plus have a little educational background. And this was at the time when I didn't know any physicians who had an MBA back in the early 90s. And so for me, it was just like, I need to do this so I can improve my chances of not having a failed business. And we were close to failing despite that. And then for law school, it was at some point, I may not want to practice emergency medicine. I had a couple of friends who were injured and couldn't practice anymore. And I realized that maybe I'm kind of a one-trick pony. So I better have a backup plan, because emergency medicine is it's a full contact sport oftentimes. And so you've got to be, you cannot be hobbling around in the emergency department. You can't use your arms if you have to intubate somebody, for example. So I thought I wanted to have a fallback plan. So that was my thought process of that.
Well, you said something that I can't just let go. You're doing something right now that has I think you said no practical or foreseeable value in the future where you're going. I'd be curious to know what this is.
And I'm going to be embarrassed, because if I don't get in, I'm going to be like, oh, I got to even get in. But I signed up to do a master's of arts and World War II history at ASU, which is a school I love. And so we'll see if I get in. But it's this, I don't know, year, 18-month program that you learn all about World War II. And since both my parents were in it, and I've always felt like somehow I belonged in that era, it'll be fun to learn about it. But it has zero pragmatic value other than my personal edification.
One of the things that comes up so often in individuals that I talk to, especially physicians, is that when they get to this place, and I'll describe it just briefly, and I've done it already, but let me describe it briefly. Well, they get to this place where they've dedicated the last 20 to 25 years of their life to something. And in this example, to emergency medicine, to the medical field, to patients, to hospitals, to a profession, to something that they love. And they've done well. They got the good grades to get into med school. They got the grades to get through med school. Then they put in the internships and they did all the work they need to do to actually get a paycheck to pay off their student debt. Then they practice. They get to actually do what they set out to do. In your case, you decided when you're 5. A lot of times they decide when they're 15, but they've dedicated 20 to 25 years of their life to something. And they get to this place, and you described it. They feel like they're a one-trick pony. Now, it's a pretty damn good trick. If you can operate on a human being, that's a damn good trick. But it's still a trick. It's still a trick to people. And so they get to this place. It's like, well, maybe I should have a plan B. Maybe there should be something there. But they don't know where to start. They don't know how to start. What advice do you give them as it relates to sunk cost? So the thing that they always come at me with is, I can't just walk away. I spent 15 years getting here, 15 years at college, 15 years. And I told my family this is what I wanted. I told my friends, and everybody assumes that this is the perfect life. I can't just give this up. How do you, or do you coach people through the sunk costs fallacy of where they're at?
So I don't believe it's a sunk cost at all, because I mean, life is, so I always describe myself in perpetual beta mode. And perpetual beta, I always like to say, is if you're not embarrassed by who you were yesterday, you're not growing. I mean, I was embarrassed by who I was this morning. And so I don't think there's really a sunk cost, because everything you learn in medical school is applicable. And I think for physicians are natural entrepreneurs, and they don't know it. Some of them know it, but a lot of them don't know it. And like, oh, that can't be me, but it is them. Because if you think about it, what does it take to be an entrepreneur? Really takes most all takes grit. All physicians have grit. You cannot go through all the BS you go through to become a physician without grit. You have to be gritty. It takes some creativity. Physicians are creative. They had to be creative getting there. It takes a degree of intelligence. Physicians are mostly, at least have a modicum of intelligence. I'm on the modicum part of that. And who better to fix healthcare than physicians? So what I always tell people is, what my weakness always is, I say, I cannot believe no one has thought of that. And so I start researching it. I'm like, no one's thought of this. Okay, and then it's got to be me. And so then I'll start a business with that sort of thing. And I hear so many physicians have these phenomenally crazy, cool ideas, but they're hamstrung by I can't give up being a physician, sunk cost, or I don't have the skills to be an entrepreneur, they do, or I don't have the money to be an entrepreneur, they do to start. And so, at least for emergency medicine, it's a perfect discipline, because one, I really do think if you do other things, it really prevents burnout. Because I'm at the point now when I go back to the emergency department, and I've been this way for years, I look forward to it and I'm like, oh, hell yeah, it's good to be back. But it's also good to be gone, because you're doing all these other cool things that you can make a dent in the universe on. And so I really think for physicians are in the perfect position to fix healthcare, to do other things. They're not one-trick ponies. And the sunk costs are actually just simply building blocks for their future. That's the answer.
That's awesome. I love it, man. And it's going to take us beautifully into what I want to talk about next. And that's Entrepreneur RX, your book. And it sounds to me like what you just talked about in the last 2 minutes is kind of the preamble to, hey, dude. And I mean, dude, gender neutrally.
Yeah.
I get in trouble for that.
Dude,
I just mean, that's right. Dudes and dudettes.
Yeah.
I just mean, hey, individual, you look at what you've done, look what you've accomplished, look what it takes to be an entrepreneur, look what it takes to be you. They fit. Take me through. So if that was me, or it's one of the thousands of doctors who are listening to this podcast, and you just got their attention, it's like, holy shit, I do have those traits. I do have an idea. I do have something I want to try. I do not have clarity on what it is, but I believe it's there somewhere. How would you kind of sit down in a few minutes and help them get some confidence or build some courage around moving this idea forward?
So I always look for ideas, and I have a venture capital company, and we look for ideas to fund that are this way, that are frequent, expensive, and recurring. And so if you have a solution that hits those marks, you find a problem that happens repetitively, that's expensive to solve and really needs to be solved, you're onto something. And then do the research and see if there's anything else out there that can do that. And if there are, great, move on. If there are great, but they're not really doing it, then okay, investigate further. Why aren't they? But for a lot of things I've had physicians tell me, I mean, one company we're looking at now just found a better way to sharpen scalpels. And they make these scalpels like 10x sharper. And I was kind of like, oh, they seem sharp enough to me because I cut myself on them occasionally. They said, yeah, but that's true. But the sharper they are, the less tissue damage they do. Because the less tissue damage to the side of the actual incision. So that was a surgeon who came up with that idea. But physicians have these great ideas all the time. And so then find someone, and for me, a lot of it was, okay, who can I do this with? And what the mistake a lot of us have made is you want to find somebody who's like you. So then you sit around, you have a great time, and you say something, and they're like, yeah, exactly. And they say something, they're like, exactly. That's not who you want. You want somebody who has a totally different skill set. I think Henry Ford said, if two people at the table are thinking the same, you don't need one of them. And so find a technical co-founder. So if you're a physician with the idea, and the idea is an app or a software solution, find a technical co-founder who can program, or hire out offshore or onshore, and then come up with a minimum viable product and test it out, and test it out with your friends for sure, but test it out with other people. Your friends are going to say, wow, that's really cool. And then they roll their eyes when you walk away. But test it out with people who do not have to give you that validation. And so, you basically build something and pivot until you get product market fit, even if just a little bit, and then go out and find funding or fund it yourself. I mean, most physicians can afford the first round of capital themselves. I think, I started next year, I think I had 3 mortgages on our house, and had to sell a helicopter to make payroll one time, which was, I love that helicopter. But anyway, I think most of us can afford at least the first few rounds. And then if you have some traction, then go out and raise money for it. It sounds onerous, but it's like that stupid quote, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. It's trite, but true. So if you take the first step, the second step's even easier. And then you just keep on walking.
In reading your book, I mean, some of the concepts you offer up, these are all things I wrote down well before this conversation. Didn't know where it was going to go. But one of the first things you talk about in your book is embracing failure. And I mean, this goes back to the conversation 30 minutes ago, in that your superpower is that you're really, these are my words, and you're gonna have to correct me, but you're really comfortable with you're expecting that to get where you're going is going to take failure. And in fact, you can't get there if you don't have it. And you've arrived at this place through practice of just being okay with failure. And that is so hard for somebody who's at this level, who's not done it before, right? They if they're in the ER or OR right now, chances are, by and large, most of them don't have a plan B, even though they might be dreaming and thinking about one. And they're not good at failure. In fact, they've built their entire life on being the person who doesn't fail, is the problem solver, is the fixer, is all those things. How could you, if I was your client and I had an idea and I'm trying like hell to diversify, what advice would, I was scared to fail. What advice, how would you coach me through just being okay, getting okay, settling into the fact that it's probably going to fail?
Well, I think it's a Winston Churchill quote, and I'll probably butcher it, but it's success is going from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. And I do a lot of reading, and when you do a lot of reading on the subject, you'll find that most great successes were failure after failure after failure. The whole Thomas Edison thing, I know 10,000 ways not to make a light bulb. Ray Kroc said, yeah, it was an overnight success if the night was 30 years long. And I think if you read enough, you get the sense that A, you're not alone. B, people have had much harder struggles than you will likely have. And that failure is often just one more step away from the time when you want to quit. And there were, I think of a number of businesses I did that just never worked out. I was too early. There was no product market fit. My execution sucked. But I learned a lot from them. And I will tell you that every failure I had, every one of them, 2 or 3 weeks or months or even years later, I would look back and say, oh my God, thank God I failed, because had I not failed, I would not have done this. And had I not done this, I wouldn't have done this every time. And so if you fail and just are like, screw it, I'm done, I'm out. Okay. But I will tell you that all the things you learned failing can be applied to something else where you won't fail. Or maybe it'll take 2 or 3 failures, but they'll be applied to something else. And if you keep the right construct, if the right set of glasses on, in getting past the fear of failure, you'll hit it.
How important is it to make failures, or let me say it differently. How important is it to have a test scenario where you're testing something early and often versus putting all of your effort, all of your financial effort into something big that you one day want to launch and then test it after you think it's ready?
So I was more the latter than the former. The books say do it the former way. Incremental changes, find product market fit, pivot, pivot, pivot until you really get product market fit, and then try to scale it. Peter Thiel wrote a book with Blake Masterson called 0 to 1. And in this book, they talk about 0 to 1 is something no one's ever done. And then you take it off. In PayPal is a good 0 to 1 thing. And I've done a couple 0 to 1 things. And then there's 1 to N. 1 to N is someone who's already done it. And then you take it and go further. And they always say, if you want to go 1 to 10, that's great. But your 1 has to be 10x better than your competitors. Or people are going to be like, yeah, so what? It's just, it's incremental change. You're not going to do it. I've tended to think where things make total sense to me, therefore they make total sense to everybody, let's just go do it. So this was urgent care for me in 93. I was an ER doc, and I thought, well, gosh, someday someone's going to not want to pay all this money for me to diagnose their UTI or pneumonia or whatever. There has to be a better way, these walking clinics. And there may have been urgent cares in the early 90s. I didn't see any. So I came out to Phoenix and started Next Care. And it was called Arizona Family and Urgent Care, until someone answered the phone, thanks for calling, off fuck. And I'm like, well, that's not going to work. And so it became Next Care. And I spent a lot of time and money educating people that, no, this is where you go when you don't really have a true life-threatening emergency, but you want to be seen right away. And now it sounds totally ridiculous because you can't spit without hitting an urgent care. But in 93 and 95 and in Denver in 98, I would get these people say, well, what urgent care? Do you have to be sicker to go to an urgent care than an ER? And I would just be like, oh, I am so screwed, because the population knew what urgent care was. And in 2010, I did MeMD, which was virtual medicine. Again, made total sense to me. And people are like, what? You can see a doctor and they don't touch you? And I'm like, hey, it have to be if I say I don't want to touch, or I don't need to touch, even better. And it was such a foreign construct to people. And really for the first 5 or 6 years, it was education. It was just a ton of education. And had I tried to find an early product market fit for either of them, I would have turned them off because there was none. When I went to health plans for both of them, they're like, yeah, we're not doing that. That doesn't make any sense to us. And so it was and I was just basically too stupid to quit.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning into the Normal 40 podcast. My name is Lon Stroschein, founder of the Normal 40, and I'm super glad you're here. Hey, really quick, by now you know it's my mission to inspire the change in 1,000 lives. And you know that this podcast is just one of the ways I'm doing it. You can also go to my website, normal40.com, and sign up for my free newsletter that comes directly to your inbox. Now, it's not really a newsletter in the sense that you're going to find much news in it. It's just letters from me to you, man, right where you are on your journey. The topics are going to vary from week to week, and I might have a guest article from time to time, but the intent of the Rambler is to meet you right where you're at, and I hope you sign up. You can also sign up for the 14 questions that changed my life. These are questions you can answer for yourself, but these are the questions I wrestled with when I was right where you are. Just a couple other things really quick. A few weeks ago, I launched my book called The Trade, and The Trade within minutes was an Amazon #1 bestseller in multiple categories, and it remains there to this day. I would love it if you'd go buy the book, not because you're going to get something out of me when you read it. It's because the book is going to get something out of you when you read it. Lastly, I've got a closed group off LinkedIn that I call the Insider, and this is where I hang out. I hang out a few times a month in cohorts and in one-on-one calls, and you can come in there and you can join the Insider and you can see for yourself that you are not alone. I would love to see you in there. Look, last thing I'll say is if you're here and this podcast is resonating with you and you can feel something burbling up, I want you to know that you are ready. You are here not because an algorithm. You are here because you are ready, and I want to help you see you through to the other side. Everyone, thanks for being here. Check out the other episodes, and I'm going to see you a little further down the road. How have you used in all of these scenarios, and everything you've kind of done, how have you used community and the people around you to help you navigate these tough times?
I mean, I've asked a lot of people a lot of questions and sought a lot of advice, and some of which I say, okay, and some of which I say, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't realize that. And for me, going back to school, I would say it was like putting on a new pair of glasses. I would be in school, I'd be sitting in law school, and I'd all of a sudden be like, I've got this great business idea. how did I not see this before? It was staring me right in the face. And but for hearing or reading something, it never would have hit me. And so that's why I think, there's that saying, you know, people that don't read, they're no better than people that can't read, in the sense that the learning opportunity is the same, zero. And so for me, reading and going to school was always generally the spark. So there was a book I was reading, it was a Malcolm Gladwell book, and they talked in this book, I think it was Blink, and they talked about women physicians are much less likely to get sued than men. And actually in Blink it was, they listened to the conversation that surgeons had with patients. It was done at Harvard. Nothing about the words, just the tone. And they went back to Harvard undergrads and played the tone for them. And they said, guess which surgeons had been sued and which hadn't. And they had like a 97% sensitivity to this. And I remember, and then I heard that quote about women physicians are sued less. So I put it together and I said, well, what if you're a male physician that acts like a woman, that treats patients with the qualities that women physicians have, which is probably better communication skills, more empathy, more compassion. But what if you're a guy who's does that you should pay less in malpractice? So we came up, I found a couple PhDs. We wrote this test. To measure those three traits. We tested a bunch of people. We found out the test had pretty high predictive value to see which physicians had been sued and which hadn't. And so then I went to the insurance plan and said, look, if you give your male physicians this test and they pass it, they should pay less malpractice. And they said, well, yeah, here's the data. And I said, and if they do, I want a cut of it. And so that was called M-Star. And so it was this conflagration of reading the books, sitting in law school, and then having that idea that made it come together. So I guess community really helps that way. If you can stir this amalgam up, and things occasionally bubble to the surface, some of which are totally stupid and some of which go, oh, that makes a little sense.
In the world you've created, in your community or communities, the people you trust, who's the first person you call when you've got shit, nobody's doing this yet? Who's that first person that or community you go to?
It varies per the idea. If it's a tech idea, there's tech people. If the delivery of care model, there's people that are in that realm. But my fatal flaw is oftentimes that if it makes sense to me, I always think, well, I'm no rocket science. If it makes sense to me, it makes sense to everybody. And then why shouldn't we do it? And then I'll go way down this rabbit hole. So I started a business called Healthy Bid, which was a reverse auction. So that, wouldn't it be cool if you knew you had to have your gallbladder out, you could upload your medical record, put in your symptoms, and surgeons and surgery centers would bid on this. And if you had a high deductible plan or were paying cash, they would say, look, we're always unbusy. It's 8 a.m. on Tuesday, the third Tuesday of the month. Look, we'll do it for cost. And so this to me was a no-brainer. And so I built this whole website, did all the stuff, and started contacting with surgeons and these surgery centers. And they'd be like, yeah, no, we can't go lower than Medicare. I said, no, you can. Here's the law. You just can't do it. You can do one-offs all the time, but you just can't do it you can't be lower than Medicare all the time. And so this was in, I don't know, 2013 or so. And it was just probably ahead of its time. But it made sense to me that for these surgery centers, they'd rather make their cost than make nothing and have an open operating room. And the patients would say, well, yeah, I'd rather pay less and get the same quality than paying more, on a Thursday at 4 o'clock when the place was swamped. Went nowhere, failed miserably.
You just said 5 words that I wonder how much these 5 words have cost you and made you in your lifetime. Wouldn't it be cool if?
Oh, I know. It's the bane of my existence. I was doing a eulogy. I was trying to write this eulogy for my father. And I realized he was 97 and I'm adopted. And although we were always friendly, we never really clicked. I mean, he was a stoic non-talker, and I'm not a hyper questioner. And so I never really knew him. So I'm trying to write this eulogy, and I did, God, wouldn't it be cool that you could every year, if you wanted to, auto write an autobiography and tag it to milestones that happened in sports in the US, in Arizona, in the world. And so you'd have all these anchor points, but you'd say, here's all the things I did this last year. Wouldn't it be cool if there was something that did that? And I looked, there wasn't anything. So I came up with this business called My Auto Bio, which it would ask you questions either on the phone or in an email, and you just type in answers. things you learned, things you read, posts you made. It would scour your social media. It would also place in world events that you're choosing. So I did, for me, I went back to 1860. I did 100 years. I'm sorry, 1890, and did the top 10 events that happened every month for the last 100 years. And then found some folks who were far smarter than me and built this out. Went nowhere. But those words, wouldn't it be cool if, were, have been, like you said, the blessing and the bane. Because in my mind, so the plan of this whole thing was that in 30 years, wouldn't it be cool if I cataloged my life for a number of years, and long after I was dead, my future relatives go back and say, God, I wonder what great, great, great grandfather John advice would give me for this problem. And if they had enough information there, they could ask your avatar, and you'd respond as if it was you. So we built that out. And, the avatar gave better advice than I would give. So I liked it.
This is going to take us right into what I think will be the last topic that I want to spend some time on. When we talked, we were connected by Dr. O'Malley, mutual friend of ours, and we hopped on a phone call and we just rambled a little bit, and it led to, hey, let's do a podcast, and you were gracious enough to do it. And towards the end of that conversation, you were asking a little bit more about my audience and who shows up here. And I gave you the context. I said they're leaders and doers. They've dedicated their life to a single passion. They're the providers in their family. They're the problem solvers. They've got good marriages, but not great. There's room for improvement. They've lived right. They live life by the book. They've outperformed their own expectations. They're relentlessly loyal, and they're really lousy about asking for help. And after all this success, they've arrived at this place where they're frustrated, caged, controlled, lost in this weird way because they can't tell anybody what they really feel. They're stressed at work because it's a stressful job, but they're stressed because they're not happy in their stressful job. And that's a concerning thing. They're annoyed, alone, paralyzed. And we talked about all these things that the people who are listening, I just nailed them. They just probably shook their head and said, holy shit. Yes, that's me. And then I talked about, this transition that they wrestle with. And you brought something up that I'd never heard of before. And you started educating me on it. And since then I've done some research, and it's called the Hamilton complex. And you said you related with it because you self-diagnosed yourself on a certain level with having probably some Hamilton complex traits yourself. And some of that you trace back into the earliest years of your life. So I'm going to stop there. And if you don't mind, can you just educate people here, in case they don't know, what is the Hamilton complex?
So I heard it once, and I've looked it up since, and I've never really been able to find a source for it. But what I remember hearing is that I'm sure it can be men or women, but this is relation to men. And it's men who have been abandoned one way or another by parents, by adoption, by an orphanage, and they have a chip on their shoulder. And the chip on their shoulder is they feel like they have to prove themselves. And I would say it's mostly prove themselves to themselves. And if you read about Hamilton or watch the amazing musical, it rings true. And then you look at other people, and I remember they talked about Springsteen and Bono in this, and then one other person I can't remember, but they all had something to prove. It was kind of like I am worthy, and it's maybe self-validation. And so I kind of always thought there's two ways to go down this path. If you have this, it's a chip on your shoulder. One is kind of the negative way, which is the people that you think of with chips on their shoulders who are bitter and antagonistic, and maybe crime or drugs or alcohol or whatever is their crutch and their medication. And then the opposite of that is the I'll show you. And then their medication is, I just saw Springsteen, he's still touring at 76 and total badass and killing it. And that's his medication. And he admits it in his book. Not admits it, but he says it in his book. Clearly that's his medication. And Hamilton, same way. It was he just, partly, just to paraphrase, just got shit done. And I've always, not that I'm anywhere near Hamilton or anything like that, but I've always had thought of this myself as probably having this chip on my shoulder from being adopted, from starting out in an orphanage, like I'm worthy, shouldn't have been thrown in an orphanage. I'll show you.
Yeah, I think so many of the people I talk to, and I'm sure that you talk to too, are right there. I mean, who I wonder how many physicians. So I'm going to read what I found. It's not,
Yeah.
this is not a clinical
You'll have to send it to me
diagnosis.
because I could not find it.
Yeah. So it's not very long. The Hamilton complex refers to a psychological phenomenon often observed in high achieving individuals who carry deep internal drive to prove their worth to themselves and others. This drive often stems from early life changes, such as abandonment, loss, or feelings of inadequacy, which creates a chip on the shoulder, the exact words you just used. One more paragraph, and it says, for some, this manifests in relentless ambition and success fueled by a desire to overcome perceived shortcomings. For others, it can lead to self-destructive behaviors if unchecked. The term is inspired by historical cultural figures like Alexander Hamilton. So, I mean, your explanation was exactly spot on. And I wonder, and I don't know, I don't have any research on this, but you think about the mindset of the individual who decides at age 5 or 15 or 18 that they are going to pledge the next decade of their life to giving all of their money, all of their time to becoming something that in our society is really at the pinnacle of image and reputation. And that's not a knock. That's I say that with it's true, and it's something I admire. It's kind of factual. So I wonder how many people who are in the ER, in the OR, in the healthcare setting suffer from some element of this. And I got to prove to mom and dad I can do this. I got to prove to grandma and grandpa we're so happy I was going down this path that I'm capable of this. And now that they're there, they can't disconnect themselves from it. I wonder how many people suffer from this.
I mean, I had friends in medical school who were all the way through medical school, and they hated medical school and they hated medicine, and they were absolutely miserable. I was just fortunate that if there's one thing in my life I was born to do, it was practice medicine, and actually practice emergency medicine. I was born to do that. So I was really fortunate. Two things really made the cement of this for me. I was a resident, and I was pretty early. And I remember looking at this guy who was dying, and he knew he was dying. He wasn't my patient, but he was across the ER for me. And now this may have been all in my head, but he had the most dejected, absolute, miserable looks on his face because he knew it was his last day on earth. And I remember I started calling it the if only look. And I thought, I will be damned if I'm laying on my deathbed with that look on my face. I will do everything I can. So that's not me. I will not die with if only look on my face. And then there's this Hunter S. Thompson quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I can't quote off the top of my head, but it's, life's journey is to arrive at the grave, not in a well-preserved body, but the skid and sideways, totally worn out, yelling, holy shit, what a ride. And I saw that quote right after. I'm like, that's me. That's how I want to go into the grave. And then there's this quote that says, the definition of hell is when you're on your deathbed, you meet the person you could have become. And those three things happened those two quotes and that experience were really short order, close together to me. And I'm like, done, get it. That was, if there was an aha moment in my life, that was the aha moment.
The if only look, man, do I love that.
So yeah, it's Hunter S. Thompson.
So in the last page of my book, I talk about the book of people's lives. And keep in mind, I just described multiple times the person I'm writing to. It's me in multiple forms. And in the closing lines of my book, I say, the book of your life will not end with the two words, the end. It will end with one of two phrases. I'm glad I did it, or I wish I'd have tried. And you're writing those words today. And, it's the same thing. It's avoid the if only look. Don't get to that day, because we don't know when that day is. Don't get to that day knowing it's your last day, thinking, if only I'd have bought John's book, and I would have embraced the fact that maybe I'm going to do this and it'll fail, but that's okay. I'm smart and I can do this. That if only I'd have had a plan and I'd have tested it. If only I'd have chose the right partners to help augment the skill sets I don't yet have and shared in the revenue, because that would have been great. If only I'd have found the balance that I needed to do that. I mean, it's the if only comes back again and again and again. And these are all the points you make in your book. And I think it's fantastic.
Well, I was saying the other thing quickly for me is, working on the reservation is every day I walk out of there and think my worst day is 100 times better than their best day. And so I know it's trite, but the whole practice of gratitude, where anybody listening to your podcast has it 100x better than many people in the US. And that emergency medicine, that constant reminder is a phenomenal reminder, because you tend to get, to find misery and meaningless shit, frankly. And so then you see people who really are suffering and don't have a roof over their head, don't have an adequate food supply, don't have running water. And you're like, what should I ever complain about? And the answer is probably nothing, because comparatively, it's man's search for meaning. It's, he lives through concentration camp. How could I ever complain? I still do, but every time I do, I think of that.
It's we're all gonna complain from time to time. I was gonna end the podcast here, but I can't right now. I would love for you to tell me what was going on. I mean, you're perpetually busy, perpetually busy. Even taking time out to talk with us here is such a gift. And then you tend to have, you make the time to do big things. You make the time for that, which means you got to say no to a whole bunch of things. And I'd love to go down that vein. How do you decide what to say no to? But I'm not yet. We don't have enough time. I want to know what found you? Where were you in this world when you said, I've got to give a piece of me, a big piece of me, to helping healthcare, helping people on reservations enjoy the basic decency of quality healthcare, at least the people I can reach? What was going on when you said, I'm been prepared to do this, I'm able to do this, and damn it, I'm going to do this? What was going on in your world when you said this?
It was embarrassed. It was actually embarrassment. I was working as the chief medical officer on this brand new facility 90 miles from Phoenix, the fifth largest city in the country. This guy came in, and I love this place. I still call them people, their family. And he came in, he was like 400 pounds, and he was in respiratory distress, and I ended up having to intubate him. And he was so big, we flew him out on a Blackhawk. And I see him in the hospital 2 weeks later. I'm like, dude, I go, what happened to you? I go, how did you let yourself get so sick? And he's like, and he's a gentle giant. He's like, I don't know, John. And I said, you have sleep apnea, don't you? He's like, yeah. I said, well, can I get you a machine? He goes, no, I have a machine. I go, well, do you need a new mask? Because I can get you a mask. He goes, no, I think I have a mask. I go, well, does your machine not work? He goes, I think it works. I go, well, are you using your machine? He goes, well, no, I don't have electricity. And that was my aha moment of how dumb am I, and how embarrassed this is. The United States, 90 miles from fifth largest city. That's the construct this poor gentleman had. I'm like, F this. This has to change. And as I looked into it more, this was not a one-off problem. This is endemic to reservations all over the country. In that a lot of people have this thing, oh, they have casinos, all those Native Americans make a ton of money. Totally not true. They are, the vast majority live well below the poverty level, and they do it with a lot of grace and dignity. And they do have 400 years of historical trauma that they have to fight through that's genetically encoded. So I've always I always say this, I want to leave the world a better place than I found it. And if I can be that pebble in the pond, again, sounds very trite, but I found a lot of satisfaction opening people's eyes up to how poor the healthcare is on native lands and how badly they have been screwed over for generations. And there is no light at the end of the tunnel for them that I've yet to see. So I thought, if I could find people who want to make a difference, who are mission based, I'm happy to support the hell out of them. And I always tell people, my job is to take care of the people who are taking care of the people. And I love going to practice there as well. But we have 500 nurses and doctors and techs that go out there and do this, and they are ride or die. Best business I've ever had, best people I've ever worked with, hands down.
What's the name of the business?
Tribal Health. A very blunt, boring name. It's the website's tribalhealth.com.
Would you take a doctor or a nurse or somebody who wanted to be involved right now?
Yeah, I mean, they're well paid. It's, not the easiest place to work. There's days I walk out of there and I go, well, I never thought I'd see that. It's just crazy ass stuff. So you've got to bring your A game, but you've got to bring your A heart too, because I was there on Friday, drive-by gunshot wound that came in, a kid who was walking home and just got hit and run by a car, who was just badly injured. And it's just, for these folks, it's just like, nah, yeah, that's just life on the res. And the stuff you see out of 13-year-old girl with a blood alcohol 410, which, would kill you and I together. But that was just her construct. And part of me is going like, what, dude, like, you're 13. And then you hear her story, and I'm like, I'd be drunker than you, because her story is horrific. I just want to take her home. I mean, it was horrific. And so it's embarrassing that that's in the US right now, frankly. It's pathetic.
Well, we've been on a journey with you here, John, going back to your adoption and your dad in fifth grade, getting a book, uh, Mike Hannigan, your journey through med school and then business school, then law school. I might have those backwards, and then a black belt, and then becoming a pilot. We haven't even really talked about that, but you and I geek out on that way too much.
Oh yeah.
And we didn't even talk about how did you the SWAT team? Ah, gosh, we're gonna have to do another podcast for this. But here's my point. When I talk about all of these things you've achieved, and I'm sure if I looked another 10 minutes, I'd have found 10 more things. I want to know when you're not John the doctor, John the attorney, John the venture capitalist, John the author, John the entrepreneur, John the pilot, John the individual who's showing up to help people who should have the basic decency of healthcare, and you're just John. Who are you underneath all those titles? What makes you tick?
I'm an incredibly boring introvert, honestly, where I like to write and read. And I'm actually really a pretty boring introvert. I, have this 4:30 in the morning up here working out for a couple hours, write a lot, read a lot, and work with some really cool people.
And what's left undone for you? What's something you're gonna do? Damn it!
Here's one of the things I'm working on, which I hope will ring true with people because it has to be brought out. There's an impending disaster in healthcare today. If you're a physician and a nurse too, I suspect, but definitely physicians, and you have a mental health crisis, you are loath to go out and seek treatment for it because if you do, it's reportable. And so most people just suffer in silence, which is why this physician suicide rate is much higher than the normal population. I think it's 4 or 5x. So if you do any research at all, you'll see these rock star physicians who are killing themselves because they didn't feel comfortable seeking help because, when they apply to their when they apply to their hospital or they apply to health plans, you'd be diagnosed with any psychiatric illnesses. Well, yes, I have manic depressive, I have depression, I have this, I'm on this medication. And so most of us don't. And so what some people turn to as well, they'll drink alcohol or they'll do whatever as a way to self-medicate. And it is a crisis. And so I've been working on the screenplay for a while where a physician hangs himself, an emergency medicine physician hangs himself and gets resuscitated. And he goes from this cold, unfeeling, just totally shut down person who has all the defenses up to an empath. And he kind of looks at a new way to practice medicine, this empathic way. But the core of this is that we are loath to admit that we need help as well. And a lot of us have seen some shit that shouldn't be seen by anybody. And yet there's nowhere to turn to for physicians, generally speaking, which is why the suicidality rate and the drug and alcohol rate is high and getting climbing. So that's kind of my next project.
That's outstanding. I'm kind of stammering because I'm wondering what to even say to that. I do have something when we're done recording I want to share with you because I get to talk to amazing people, and there's somebody I need to introduce you to. And maybe it takes you somewhere, maybe it doesn't, but I have a feeling that it might be your next Mike Hannigan, if I'm being honest. Because he has a story, he's got means, and he shares this passion. He just told me about it. So, yeah. Look, John, we're going to put a bow on it right here, but thank you so much for being part of this podcast. Thanks for giving us all something to shoot for. Thanks for your being so approachable. I want to be careful because I'm not volunteering your inbox to just anybody, but you, for me, have been entirely approachable. And I can already tell that this conversation, people are going to be leaning into this. They're going to take another walk around the block as these are filling their AirPods because they want to hear what you're talking about next. So thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you. I'm honored to do it and happy to chat with anybody. And if I can be of any assistance, count me in.
Where can people find you? Where do you send people when they say, how do I find out more about John?
I mean, LinkedIn's pretty easy to message me on LinkedIn. My email address is just J Shufeldt. And probably the easiest one is jshufeldt@tribalhealth.com.
All right, man. Well, thanks again. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being on this journey. Thanks for sharing. And we just might have to do this again.
Thank you. Honored.
Hey, everybody, that's going to do it for me, Lon Stroschein. And I want to say one more time to my friend, Dr. John Shufeldt, thank you for being here, dude. You're just, your approachability, your kindness, your gift of time, and just your ability to dive right into conversation in a random way, like I always do, is something I find fascinating and endearing. And thanks for spending an hour with us. To all of you, don't forget, you can follow me here. You can listen to a whole bunch more episodes. You can go to my website. You can join my insider community. You can join Vintage One. You can sign up for my free newsletter. You can do all sorts of things, or you can do nothing. The fact of the matter is, from here, it's on you. I'll be here whether you are or not. All right, everyone, that's going to do it for me. I'd like to say thank you to Kelly and thank you to Joan for helping me put this podcast together. Also, thank you to Damien Boudreau, who wrote and played this outstanding theme music for the Normal 40. Thank all of you for being here, and I'm going to see all of you on the next page.